It's late. You're deep asleep in a quiet farmhouse somewhere in the New York countryside. You have no idea that just a few miles away, enemy troops are marching. Someone has to alert the militiamen. But wait, one unlikely hero is already on it. A 16-year-old girl, galloping through the night, soaking wet, her voice almost broken from shouting, her stick pounding on doors. Wake up! Wake up! The enemy is near, the British are here. And while Paul Revere got a poem, she was forgotten. I think it's time we remember her. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you the story of Sybil Ludington. By the spring of 1777, the American Revolutionary War was deep into its second year, and the outcome was anything but certain. The initial excitement of rebellion had soon given way to grim realities. British forces had captured New York City, dealing a major blow to the Continental Army, which at this time was poorly funded, under-equipped and constantly on the move. In the Hudson Valley and western Connecticut, tensions ran high as Loyalist and Patriot communities lived side by side, often clashing in violence and espionage. British troops and their Hessian allies launched swift raids into smaller towns, hoping to destroy supply depots and crush morale. The British, led by General William Tryon and accompanied by about 2,000 troops, made a landing in Connecticut on Friday, the 25th of April 1777. Their target? Danbury. A once quiet town turned into a military stockpile for the Continental forces. The next day, on April 26th, they reached the town and began destroying army supplies stored there: food, medicine, clothing and ammunition. By the time Continental Army Commander Colonel Henry Ludington received word of the British attack, Danbury was already under siege and several buildings had been set on fire. There was no time to save the town of Danbury itself, but there was still time to intercept the British on their return back to the coast. However, evening was soon approaching, and the colonel's militiamen were scattered across rural communities in the surrounding area, including Mahopac, Stormville and Carmel. How could he gather his men before the British could slip away? You see, word had to be delivered to every household containing militiamen under his command. And many of these households were isolated farms, meaning they had to be visited and informed individually, one at a time. Since Colonel Ludington was bound to his command post and had to stay there to organize the defense, he needed someone else to spread the alarm and rally his men to arms. The late hours of the night were soon approaching, and the weather outside became stormy, when suddenly his 16-year-old daughter Sybil stepped forward. Sybil was the eldest of Colonel Ludington's 12 children. Yep, 12, and she knew the names, farms and roads as well as anyone. She quickly volunteered to ride through the storm at night to gather her father's men. But hold on a minute here. Why did a 16-year-old girl have to volunteer for such a considerable task to begin with? Allow me to explain. This story about Sybil Ludington is, at its core, actually a story about communication. How vital messages were passed in a world without phones, radios, or even reliable roads. During the 18th century, war was as much about movement and information as it was about muskets and cannons. There were no phones, no radios, no telegraphs. If you wanted to deliver a message, you had one option: send a person. Sometimes that meant a soldier, but sometimes, like in Sybil's case, it meant sending a teenage girl at night during stormy weather. These riders were the lifeblood of coordination. They carried orders, warnings, and intelligence between commanders and militia scattered across the vast and rural landscapes. There were no printed maps in every home, no central meeting points, so each message had to be delivered door to door. Others used drums or bells and even signal fires, but these were blunt tools. If you needed a message delivered precisely and urgently, you sent a rider. And in moments like these, when everything was at stake, someone, anyone, had to become that signal. Sometimes the revolution moved forward with words, and often from civilians on horseback. Now, let's return to young Sybil, stepping forward to volunteer. How did her father react? Well, out of desperation and probably a lot of trust, he allowed her to go. Sybil went alone. She rode through storm and darkness along muddy, unlit roads. She rode through forests and farmlands, shouting warnings and pounding on farmhouse doors with her wooden stick. "Wake up! The British are burning Danbury! Rally at Ludington's!" She covered nearly 40 miles that night, twice the distance of Paul Revere's famous ride, facing not only a thunderstorm and exhaustion, but the real danger of highwaymen, Loyalist patrols, and wild animals. By dawn, the response had come. The militia, spread across multiple towns and farms, assembled at her father's headquarters in Fredericksburg, ready to push back. Danbury burned, but thanks to Sybil's ride, hundreds of local soldiers were able to regroup and confront the British at the Battle of Ridgefield the next day. The Battle of Ridgefield commenced when the retreating British forces was attacked by the assembled American militia. Fighting soon became fierce. General David Wooster launched hit-and-run attacks on the British rear, and although he was mortally wounded himself, his actions slowed their advance towards the coast. In the heart of Ridgefield, General Benedict Arnold led a desperate defense, erecting barricades and engaging in brutal street fighting with the British. The British eventually broke through and continued their retreat towards the coast, but not without cost. While the battle itself was a tactical win for the British, it was a moral and strategic victory for the Americans. The militia had proven they could assemble quickly, fight bravely, and push back the enemy, even after suffering a blow like the burning of Danbury. And yes, General Benedict Arnold, who led the defense at Ridgefield, would write himself into American history books again, just 3 years later for a very different reason. He switched sides, offering to betray West Point to the British. His legacy today is one of tragic infamy. Arnold was in fact a brilliant commander, but also a man consumed by wounded pride. Passed over for promotions and accused of corruption, he grew resentful of a cause he once helped save. His decision to defect stunned the colonies. And today his name in the United States, much like Quisling here in Norway, has become synonymous with traitor. And yet, before his betrayal, Arnold was one of the most effective and daring officers the Patriot cause had. And that is perhaps the greatest irony of all. That a man who helped hold the revolution together is now mostly remembered for trying to tear it apart. The American Revolution would grind on for another 6 long years after the Battle of Ridgefield. There would be bitter winters, shifting alliances and staggering losses. But there would also be turning points, like Saratoga, where American forces proved they could truly defeat a British army, and Yorktown, where Washington's troops, with the help of the French, finally forced a British surrender in 1781. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the war. What had begun as a ragtag rebellion became a nation, imperfect and still divided, but free to shape its own future. And the revolution wasn't won by generals alone. It was carried one step at a time by farmers and foot soldiers, spies and scouts, messengers and midnight riders, like Sybil Ludington. After her famous ride, Sybil returned to the quiet life of a young woman in rural New York. She later married, became Sybil Ogden, raised children, and lived out her days far from fame or headlines. In 1838, more than 60 years after her ride, she applied for a military pension, hoping to gain recognition for her service during the Revolutionary War. But her request was denied. The government at the time only granted pensions to soldiers, not to civilians or those in unofficial roles, no matter how dangerous or vital their contribution had been. Sybil's courageous act didn't qualify on paper. The rejection wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. And it reflected a broader truth, that women's roles during wartime were often overlooked, undocumented, and uncelebrated. In fact, historians have questioned the accuracy of Sybil's story itself. Unlike Paul Revere, whose ride was recorded and celebrated in poetry during his lifetime, Sybil's ride didn't appear in print until decades later. Her story was kept alive through family records and the efforts of local historians in the 19th and 20th centuries. To some, that makes her more myth than fact. But even though the details blurred over time, the essence of her ride, its urgency, its courage, they still ring true. Today, Sybil Ludington is remembered not only in books and statues, but in the very landscape she once rode through. Historical markers trace her route. Races are run in her name. Her legacy endures, not just for the miles she rode, but for the message she carried. That courage has no minimum age, and that sometimes history gallops forward on the back of someone no one saw coming. And I am certain that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories similar to Sybil Ludington's, both from past and present conflicts, that we will never hear about. Quiet acts of courage lost to time. But they endure as a testament to human bravery, to the resilience in the face of adversity, and to the shared unshakable duty we all feel towards family, home, and country. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Footnotes in History. And until our next journey through time, remember, history is closer than you think.